The slave boy moved quietly through the armory halls, his bare feet padding across the cold stone. Dust clung to his rough tunic, and his fingers ached from scrubbing hardened blood off the old weapons. He was not given a name, only a number, 71. That's all he was to the warriors of the Zareth Dominion, a slave, a boy who cleaned their spears, oiled their blades, and never lifted his eyes. Every day he worked beside the war racks, rows of long weapons with strange alien metals. Some hummed quietly, some pulsed with heat, but all were forbidden. The warriors told him if he ever touched one, his hand would be cut off. One girl his age had tried once, and her scream still haunted the corridors. 71 had no family. No memory of where he came from. He only knew chains, orders, and pain. Yet even within his silent suffering, a strange thing often happened. Some weapons buzzed louder when he neared. Some even glowed. Once, a spear's head shimmered blue the moment his hand brushed the handle. A warrior slapped him so hard he couldn't hear for 3 days. But today was different. The skies outside the stone fortress roared with fire. Sirens screamed. Warriors ran in chaos. The enemy, the Drakali, had returned, fiercer than before. The planet's shields were failing. Smoke rolled down into the training yards. Still, 71 kept working. No one gave him permission to stop. He crept into the oldest part of the armory where no warriors ever came. The air was colder. Shadows longer. Dust coated everything. In the middle of the chamber stood a single spear. Taller than the others, its shaft black as night, the blade silver and jagged like a lightning bolt. Unlike the others, it was locked in a stone cradle, with ancient runes carved around it. 71 had polished it 100 times before. It never moved. Never responded. Warriors never spoke of it, but today, the moment he stepped into the room, it glowed. He froze. The light was not bright, it was quiet, steady, calling. The hair on his arms stood up. His legs moved without thought. His hand lifted. He told himself to stop. He told himself he'd be whipped, burned, killed. But something deep inside told him this was meant to happen. He touched the spear. It burned, not pain, not heat, but fire inside his blood. A golden flame rushed through him like lightning. His knees buckled. Vision struck him, of planets burning, of starships colliding, of himself. Older, taller, standing with the spear in hand while armies knelt before him. The room pulsed. The cradle cracked. The stone broke apart, and the spear floated upward, then dropped cleanly into his grasp. From behind, a door slammed open. A warrior captain stormed in, her eyes wild, blood on her cheek. She stopped when she saw him. Her lips parted, shocked. "You," she whispered. "You can hold it?" 71 didn't speak. He couldn't, his body still shook. "That spear hasn't answered a soul in 500 years, she said. Her voice was barely above a breath. It was forged by the first flame, carried by the founder of the Zareth. Only the chosen may lift it. The spear hummed again in his hands, the tip sparking with light. The warrior's eyes narrowed. "You're not a slave," she said. "Not anymore." Outside, the ground shook. The fortress wall cracked as Drakali plasma smashed into the gates. Screams echoed. The end was near. The captain looked at him again, slower this time. "If it chose you, then fight." But 71 didn't know how to fight. He had only ever scrubbed, polished, watched. Still, as the spear's light spread through his chest, something ancient began to stir, something buried beneath fear, beneath obedience. A memory of strength not his own, a fire that did not belong to any slave. And in that moment, though no one had ever given him one, he finally chose his name. The name he chose was Kale. He didn't say it out loud, not yet, but it echoed in his mind like a quiet promise. Kale, a name meant for someone who stood tall. Not someone who flinched when shouted at or crawled through ash just to survive. The spear still burned in his hands, but it didn't hurt. It felt like it belonged, as if it had waited for him across centuries of silence. The warrior captain stared at him with a mix of confusion and something else. Respect. She didn't lower her weapon. Not fully, but she didn't try to take the spear either. "What are you?" she asked. Kale didn't know how to answer. He barely understood what he was himself. The fortress shuddered again as another blast hit from outside. The Drakali were close now. Roars filled the air. Not just their weapons, but their war beasts too. Loud and wild, like thunder with teeth, the captain barked into her comms. They've breached the second gate. All units to defensive line 3. The north wall is failing. She turned back to Kale. You follow me now. Do you understand? He nodded. His voice wouldn't work. Not yet. The captain raised her wrist and scanned the spear's hilt. Her scanner blinked red. No identity found. No signature. It's not bonded to the archives. She looked at him again. But it's bonded to you. Kale followed her out of the old armory and into the chaos of war. Fire poured from the sky as enemy ships bombarded the city. Warriors scrambled. Some flew overhead in hover packs. Others fought from crumbling towers. Screams rose like smoke. The spear in his hand began to pulse faster. Not randomly, it pulled him. Drew him toward the outer wall, the captain noticed. Where are you going? He didn't answer. He just moved. She swore under her breath but followed him anyway. At the breach, the walls had been torn open by plasma cannons. Drakali warriors poured in, tall, scaled creatures with curved blades and armor that shimmered like insect shells. They were ruthless, born for war, and right now nothing stood between them and the command tower. Kyle stepped out into the ash. A Drakali beast spotted him. It charged, 10 feet tall, 6 legs and tusks like curved swords. It roared, expecting him to run. Kale didn't. He lifted the spear. It moved on its own. The blade spun once, glowing with white-hot fire, then launched forward with a speed he didn't control. It cut through the beast like it was made of paper. The creature collapsed mid-run. Sliding across the ground in a heap, the battlefield froze. Everyone, Zareth, Drakali, slaves who had hidden in the rubble, all turned to look. Kale stood in the center, holding the burning weapon, face covered in soot, arms trembling. A second Drakali charged. Kale raised the spear again, unsure what to do. But his hands knew. His feet shifted into stance. His body moved with a memory not his own. 3 strikes. The Drakali fell. The spear vibrated in his palm, each movement making his heart pound harder. Something had awakened inside it and inside him. The captain caught up behind him, eyes wide. He's bonded to it, she whispered to herself. He's not a warrior. But the spear remembers. A roar of defiance rose from the surviving Zareth warriors. For the flame, someone shouted. Another voice answered. For the chosen. They rallied behind him. Not as a soldier. Not as a leader. But as the symbol. The boy who was nothing, holding the weapon of their founder. It gave them hope when all seemed lost. And Kale, who had been a nameless slave, now stood between the enemy and the last defenders of the fortress. He didn't understand why the spear had chosen him. Not yet. But the fire inside it didn't care about his past. It only cared about what he would do next. The battle at the north wall didn't end. It only grew. The Drakali kept coming, wave after wave, their claws flashing and blades singing through smoke. But Kale stood at the front, the ancient spear alive in his hands. The weapon struck faster than thought, burning with every hit, carving paths through enemies far stronger than him. It guided his arm, twisted his steps, and struck with a force no normal human could survive. Around him, warriors who once ignored his existence now fought beside him. They didn't speak. They didn't question. They simply followed the rhythm of the fight, moving when he moved. A formation began to form. Not trained, not commanded, but natural. Like a flame pulling dry grass into fire. Captain Alara, the same woman who had first found him with the spear, barked orders from the second line. Push forward. Reinforce Kale's flank. Keep the Drakali away from the gate. She called him by his name. Not a number. Not slave. She didn't ask where he got it. She just said it like it belonged to him all along. But the pressure was building. Kale felt it in his bones. The spear was powerful, yes, but it was also hungry. Every time it struck, it took something from him. Strength, breath, heat. His vision blurred for a moment. He shook his head and gripped the spear tighter. More Drakali dropped. Their lines broke. A scout ran up to Alara. They're falling back. The breach is holding. Kale took a step back, panting. His arms shook now. The spear, still glowing, grew hotter the longer he held it. It wasn't trying to hurt him, but it demanded more than he had ever given. Alara came to his side, gripping his shoulder. You saved this wall, she said. Kale looked up at her, confused. I don't know how I did it. You didn't need to know, she said. The spear chose. The flame remembers. Her gaze drifted to the weapon, then back to him. That spear isn't just a weapon. It's a forge mark. The founder of Zareth was the first to hold it. It binds to only one wielder at a time. No one has held it for centuries. Kyle looked at the weapon again. It pulsed softly now, like a heartbeat. His, why me? He whispered. Ilara didn't answer immediately. She just stared at him, then finally said, The flame always chooses in times of crisis. Not by blood, not by birth, but by fire. Maybe it sees what you are before you see it yourself. Another warrior approached, an elder with half his face burned, dressed in black robes instead of armor. He walked straight to Kyle, bowed slightly and said, The council has summoned the boy. Ilara narrowed her eyes. He just fought a battle. The council doesn't care, the elder said coldly. The last time that spear was held, the chosen was crowned ruler of the flame host. If they see a new chosen, they must decide what to do before the people rise behind him. Kyle didn't understand all the words, but he understood this. They feared him, not because of who he was, but what he now represented. Ilara stepped between him and the elder. He's not ready for politics. He's barely standing. But Kale nodded. I'll go, the elder gave a slight smirk. Very well. As Kale followed them toward the inner fortress, past warriors bowing their heads and frightened slaves staring in disbelief, a strange thought rose inside him. He had polished spears for most of his life. His hands knew their weight, their shape, their edges. But now one had chosen him. And it wasn't just any weapon. It was the heart of a people, the proof of destiny. But would the council accept him? Or would they try to bury the flame before it could burn away the old world? The council chamber was cold and high, with long shadows that stretched across the marble floor. 12 figures in dark robes sat on thrones shaped like spears. They watched Kale with eyes like stone. No warmth, no welcome. Just quiet judgment. The spear he carried glowed softly at his side, but Kyle kept it lowered, afraid of what might happen if it flared again. Ilara stood behind him, arms crossed. She hadn't left his side since the wall. She didn't speak unless spoken to, but her presence gave him strength. At least one person in the room didn't want him erased. One of the counselors stood. His voice was calm, sharp. You hold a weapon that once belonged to the founder. It awakened in your hands. Why? Kale swallowed. I don't know. Another voice, female and old, said, He is a slave. Trained for nothing. Born for nothing. He was not born Zareth, said a third. He cannot carry the flame. Ilara stepped forward. He held the line at the breach when your warriors fell back. The spear chose him. That is all the proof your laws require. The first speaker's lip curled. Laws were written for Zareth warriors. Not orphans raised in chains. Kale looked at them, confused. Why does it matter what I was? He asked softly. The spear picked me. Not you, murmurs rose. One of the counselors hissed. Arrogance. But the oldest among them, a woman with silver skin and a long scar over one eye, raised her hand. The room fell silent. I have seen something like this once before, she said, during the War of Three Suns. A boy chosen by the blade of ice. He too came from dust. But power does not care where a person begins, only where they're meant to go. She turned her eyes to Kale. Tell us your name. He hesitated, then spoke clearly. Kale, the old woman nodded slowly. Then, Kale, you must face the trial of flame. Gasps echoed. Ilara frowned. He just fought a battle. He's wounded. He's exhausted. The silver-eyed woman ignored her. If he is truly chosen, he will survive. If not, the spear will abandon him. Another counselor added, It is law. No one may carry the flame unless the trial accepts them. Kale didn't understand what the trial was, but he understood the look in their eyes. They didn't want him to pass it. They hoped it would break him. Maybe even kill him. I'll do it, he said. Ilara stepped beside him. You don't have to. I do, he said, voice steady. If I don't, they'll always treat me like I don't belong. The old counselor nodded once. Prepare him. The trial begins at dawn. Later that night, Kale sat alone in a cold stone room beneath the fortress. A single torch burned on the wall. His arms were bandaged. His body ached. But the spear still glowed, leaned against the wall beside him. It hadn't left him. Not once. Ilara entered carrying a bowl of water. She knelt beside him, wiping dirt from his face. I've seen warriors fall in that trial, she said. Even strong ones. The flame tests your soul, not your strength. It burns away lies, fear, doubt. Kyle looked into the firelight. Then maybe I need to burn. Ilara stared at him. For a long time, she said nothing. Then finally, she gave him a small nod. If anyone can survive it, it's you. He closed his eyes. He had no family, no home, no training, but tomorrow he would walk into the fire and he would not crawl out, he would rise. The sun had barely risen when Kale was brought to the flame chamber. It was deep beneath the fortress, hidden far below the roots of the mountain, where the heat of the world still burned. No guards followed him, no warriors escorted, only Ilara walking beside him in silence and the old counselor with silver skin leading the way. They reached a door made of black stone. Ancient runes covered it, glowing softly like breathing embers. This is the trial of flame, the counselor said. You will enter alone. You may not bring food. You may not bring armor. Only the spear and the truth within you. Kale looked at the door. His hands were shaking. What happens inside? He asked. The counselor's face remained calm. You face the fire. If it accepts you, you live. If it doesn't, we collect the ashes. Ilara stepped forward. He's ready. The door opened with a deep groan. Heat rushed out like a wave. The air shimmered. Kyle took one last look at her. Ilara didn't say anything. She just placed a hand on his shoulder for a heartbeat, then let go. Kale stepped inside. The chamber was a cavern of red stone, cracked with glowing lines. Lava bubbled far below metal grates. The walls whispered, but not in any language he knew. They whispered memories, pain, hopes, failures. He walked slowly, sweat rising on his skin. The spear in his hand began to glow brighter. Suddenly, the ground shifted beneath him. A wall of fire burst from the floor, wrapping around him like a cage. Kale shouted, but the flames didn't burn him. They moved through him, around him, then into him. Visions slammed into his mind. He saw himself, young and dirty, chained in a cell, scrubbing weapons while warriors laughed. He saw his face when he was beaten for dropping a blade. He saw the day he cried in silence, hiding behind the war racks when his friend, a boy like him, was taken and never returned. Then the vision changed. He saw the warriors kneeling. He saw cities cheering. He saw a galaxy where the old rules had burned, and something new was born in their place. A flame that didn't serve bloodlines or noble names, a fire that chose strength of spirit. He saw himself at the center of it. The fire roared. A voice deeper than stone spoke from within it. Who are you? Kale's lips trembled. I don't know. The flames twisted. Then you will die as no one. No, Kyle said, louder now. I was a slave. I cleaned their weapons. I was beaten, ignored, thrown away. The fire leaned closer. Then why do you still stand? Kale raised his head. Because I want to be more than what they made me. Silence followed. Then the fire screamed. Kyle fell to his knees. The pain now was real. His skin burned, his heart raced. The spear in his hand turned white hot, then blazed with gold light. His vision turned to fire, to stars, to ash. Every memory he ever hated tore through him like knives, but he didn't let go. He screamed, but he didn't fall. And then, the fire faded. Kale lay on the floor, gasping. Smoke rose from his skin, but his body was whole. The spear pulsed gently beside him, as if pleased. The lava below cooled. The whispering stopped. And far above, in the council chamber, the ancient runes along the ceiling glowed for the first time in centuries. The flame had accepted a new bearer. Kale didn't smile. He couldn't, he was too tired. Too raw. But he stood up. And when the doors opened once more, Ilara stood there waiting. She looked at his face and knew. You passed. He nodded. She didn't bow. But she stepped back and let him walk first. The fortress bells rang low and slow. Not an alarm this time, but a summons. Across the city, warriors gathered. Civilians peeked from their homes. Even slaves paused their work to listen. Everyone knew what it meant. The trial of flame had ended, and the doors had opened. In the center plaza, the high torch was lit. A fire only burned when a new bearer of the founder's weapon was chosen. That fire hadn't glowed in generations. The last to light it had died before Kale was even born. Now the people waited. When Kale stepped into the light, the spear in his hand pulsing with golden fire, a hush fell across the crowd. His clothes were torn, his skin marked with fresh burns, but he stood tall, straighter than he ever had. The fire behind his eyes hadn't dimmed, it had grown. Alara walked beside him, her armor cleaned, her hair tied back. She didn't speak for him. She didn't lead him. She simply stayed near, like a shield, like a shadow of loyalty. The council waited on the stone steps ahead. The same cold eyes, the same robes, but they didn't speak either. They didn't have to. The runes behind them still glowed, proof enough that the flame had accepted him. Then the silver-skinned counselor finally rose and said, "The spear has accepted Kale. The trial did not destroy him. By our oldest law, he is no longer slave. He is no longer outsider." Another counselor stood, less pleased. "The flame chooses in times of crisis, but if he commands warriors, he must be trained." "He already commands loyalty," Alara said. Without asking, Kale turned to face the gathered crowd. Most were warriors. Many had fought at the walls. He saw one who'd once kicked him for spilling oil, another who'd laughed when he was forced to eat scraps from the floor, but none of them looked at him with disgust now. They looked at the spear, at the golden light, at the boy who walked out of fire and didn't burn. One warrior stepped forward. A commander, broad shoulders, scars across his jaw. He dropped to one knee. "For the flame," he said. Another followed. "For the chosen." Then more. 10, 50, 100 warriors kneeling, not to a council, but to a boy who had once polished their weapons. Kale didn't speak. He didn't lift the spear high or shout like the war leaders did. He just said one sentence. "I'm not here to rule you." The crowd stirred. "I'm here to fight beside you. If we fall together. But if we rise, it won't be because of bloodlines. It'll be because we earned it." Alara gave him a slight nod behind him. The old counselor didn't stop the moment. She just turned and walked back into the shadows. That night, Kyle wasn't given a chamber of stone. He returned to the same cold room he had rested in before the trial. When Alara brought food, he didn't touch it for a long while. He just sat by the window looking at the distant fires of battle still burning beyond the mountains. "We won't have long," Alara said quietly. "The Drakali won't stop. They saw what happened. They'll fear the flames return." Kyle finally looked at her. "Let them. You're one boy." He looked at the spear leaning on the wall. "I was always just one boy." She stared at him for a moment, then gave a small smile. "Not anymore." Outside, under the stars, torches lit across the outer camps. Warriors began gathering, not by order, but by choice. The flame had returned, and Kale's war was only beginning. The next morning, before the twin suns rose, Kale stood in the training grounds, no longer to clean weapons but to wield one. Around him, elite warriors gathered, their armor gleaming, their faces unreadable. Some had bowed to him yesterday, others had not. Now they watched in silence, waiting to see if the flame's chosen could truly lead, or if it had simply chosen wrong. Alara stood beside him, wearing no helmet today. "They won't go easy," she warned. "Not even after the trial. Especially not after the trial." "I don't want easy," Kyle said. He stepped into the arena with the spear glowing faintly in his hand. It felt lighter now, not because it weighed less, but because it no longer resisted him. They moved together now, spear and bearer, like breath. The first warrior stepped forward. She was tall, armored in black, and carried twin blades. No words were spoken. Just a sharp nod. The test had begun. Kale didn't know formal stances. No drilled techniques. But when the warrior lunged, the spear guided him. He twisted, dropped low, spun, and caught her blade mid-swing. Sparks flew. She grunted in surprise as Kale's spear slammed into the ground beside her, ending the match without blood. The next challenger came, faster, heavier. Then another. One by one they tested him, until 10 had fallen, all defeated without a killing blow. Kale stood in the center, sweating, just rising and falling but unbroken. By the end, even the doubters began to murmur. He had not just survived the trial, he was winning. Alara stepped into the circle and raised her voice. "You've seen his strength. You've seen the flame with your own eyes. But now we must choose, will we follow the old ways? Or will we rise as something new?" No one answered aloud. But one by one, the warriors began to kneel again. This time it wasn't because of awe, it was because of belief. Later, Kale sat with Alara in the war hall. A map of the surrounding regions spread before them. Red markers covered most of it. Drekali strongholds, scout reports, destroyed cities. We're surrounded on 3 sides, she said. If we wait, they'll crush us. What about the 4th side? Kyle asked. Ilara raised a brow. The Thorn Canyons? Impassable terrain. No one goes there. He traced the edge of the map. If no one expects us from that side, we should? You want to lead the flame host through the most dangerous path on the planet? Kale looked up. If we keep doing what they expect, we'll lose. I'd rather take the path no one's watching. Ilara stared at him for a moment, then nodded. I'll prepare the scouts. That night, Kale returned to the old armory. Not to clean, not to hide, but to stand in the silence where everything had begun. He touched the stone where the spear had once rested, now cracked and empty. The whisper of fire still lingered in the air. You waited for someone, he said softly. I don't know why you chose me, but I won't let you regret it. The spear pulsed once in his hand, as if it heard. Outside, the horns of the fortress blew once. The flame host was gathering. For the first time in 100 years, the Zareth warriors would ride into enemy territory not to defend, but to strike. At the center of it all stood a boy who had once been nothing. Now, he carried fire, and he was no longer afraid to burn. The Thorn Canyons were death. That was what the maps said. That was what the elders warned. Sharp cliffs, sudden storms, and creatures that had never seen light. The Drekali never patrolled it, and even the flame host had never dared use it as a path. Until now. Kale stood on the edge of the first ridge, his cloak pressed against him by harsh winds. Below, narrow paths twisted like veins across sharp rock, barely wide enough for a single warrior to pass. No roads, no shelter, no second chances. Behind him, hundreds of Zareth soldiers waited in silence. All had volunteered. They didn't follow him because of his age or experience. They followed the spear, the flame, the fire that now lived in him. Ilara stood beside him. We lose half our strength in this canyon, we'll never survive the next battle. Kale looked at her. Then we don't lose. She stared at him a moment, then smirked. That's the worst plan I've ever heard. Still, she followed him down the first cliff. The days inside the canyon passed in shadows. Cold winds cut through armor. Strange echoes came from the caves. Twice they lost scouts to sudden drops. Once they were attacked by a swarm of blind cliff beasts that screeched like thunder and moved like water. But Kale led from the front. He never rode. He walked spear in hand through every turn and every danger. He carried the wounded. He broke the path when it collapsed. At night, when warriors whispered their doubts, he sat with them, ate the same rations, shared the same cold, and slowly, the warriors who once doubted began to believe. On the 7th day, they reached the other side. The sun hit them like a new world. The canyon opened into a wide plateau overlooking the Drekali stronghold, Fortress Threll, their command base on the planet. No one expected the Zareth forces to appear from behind. They had no defenses facing that side. Ilara scanned the field. We can strike by nightfall. Kale nodded. Prepare the fire squads. Get the signal flares ready. Ilara tilted her head. You have a plan? I have fire, Kale said. And I have warriors ready to burn. That evening, as darkness fell, Kale stood atop the hill with the flame host below him. The spear pulsed in his hand brighter than ever before. The closer he got to the Drekali, the more alive it felt. He raised the weapon. The flame shot skyward. A signal so bright it lit the clouds. The battle began. Warriors poured down the slope, striking like lightning. Drekali forces, caught off guard, scrambled to respond. Their defenses were pointed the wrong way. Their commanders hesitated. Kyle was the first to reach the wall. He leapt from the ridge, the spear burning with golden fire, and crashed into the first guard tower like a falling star. The enemy screamed as the weapon tore through their lines. Behind him, the Zareth warriors surged with a roar. Ilara's voice rang out across the battlefield. For the flame! The enemy faltered, and for the first time in decades, the Drekali command center fell. Kyle stood in the center courtyard, the fortress burning around him. Smoke filled the air, but his eyes were clear. His grip was firm. The warriors behind him gathered, not shouting, not cheering, just watching. He turned slowly. We are not finished, he said. Not until the war ends. Not until every slave is free. Not until every fire the Drakali lit is returned to them 100 times brighter. He raised the spear once more, and in the flame's light, the warriors saw not a boy, but a leader rising from ash. News of Fortress Threll's fall spread like wildfire across the stars. The Drakali Council declared it a minor setback. A lucky strike, a forgotten canyon ambush, but deep within their war halls they whispered a name they had once ignored. Not a general, not a prince, a slave boy turned flame-bearer, Kale. To the Zareth he was more than a symbol now. He was momentum. Under his lead they reclaimed 5 cities in 3 weeks. Each one guarded by enemies who expected a slow siege, but met instead with fire and fury. The flame host moved like no army had before, carving through enemy lines with speed and precision. Kale fought every battle at the front. He never issued orders from behind. His spear lit the way through enemy shields. His presence lifted exhausted warriors to their feet. When wounds struck him down, he rose again, eyes burning. Some whispered he didn't sleep. Others believed the flame itself had made him something more than human. But Kale knew the truth. He bled. He feared. He ached with every step, and the spear was demanding more. After each battle, it burned hotter, in his hand, in his mind. Not painful, but heavy. It had awakened fully now, and inside it, voices spoke to him in dreams. Memories of the Founder, echoes of ancient battles, a line of fire-bearers that had come before him, whose names had been lost to war and time. One night, as he sat outside a ruined Drakali fortress, Alara approached. She held a flask of water and a torn cloak. "You're shaking again," she said. Kale took the cloak and wrapped it around himself, but his hands didn't stop trembling. "It's the spear," he said softly. "It wants something from me. More than I understand." Alara sat beside him. "It's not a weapon." "Not really. It's a burden. Then why did it choose me?" She looked at him. Maybe because no one else would have survived it. They sat in silence, watching the flames flicker across the darkened field. Suddenly, a scout rushed toward them. "We found something," he said. "You need to see it." Kyle followed, the spear humming low at his side. They arrived at a hidden chamber beneath the fallen Drakali fortress. Old walls lined with shackles, tools, chains, and hundreds of cells. Inside them, alien slaves, starved, wounded, some barely alive. Different species, different languages, but all broken the same way Kale once had been. When he stepped inside, many turned away expecting pain. Others stared at the spear in his hand with wide, fearful eyes. Kale moved to the first cell and knelt. "You're free," he said. The alien woman inside blinked slowly. "Why would a warrior say that?" "I was you once," Kyle whispered. "No name, no choices. But fire finds us when we think we've lost everything." He turned to his warriors. "Open every cage. Give them water. Give them food." One of the captains hesitated. "Some of these species have fought against us." "Not anymore," Kale said. "They were forced. Just like I was. We don't build our future with chains." The captains obeyed. And in that moment, Kale's army grew. Not just in numbers, but in meaning. The flame host was no longer just soldiers of Zareth. It was becoming something else. A rebellion of the forgotten. A gathering of those who had been stepped on, discarded, silenced. And at the center of it stood a boy with burn scars on his arms and a spear that never dimmed. The fire wanted more, not just a battle. A war that would burn away the old galaxy, one cage at a time. The stars above the battlefield burned bright, but none brighter than the flame rising from the heart of the final Drakali stronghold. Kale stood before it, the spear in his hand pulsing with golden heat. The flame host surrounded him, Zareth warriors, former slaves, rebel defectors, and those freed from Drakali cages. What began as a handful had grown into a force that carried more than weapons. They carried purpose. Alara stepped beside him, her armor scorched, one arm wrapped in a sling. "This is it," she said. "The core fortress. If we take it, the Drakali Council falls." Kale's face was calm, but his eyes were full of storm. "Then we burn the last chain tonight." He led the charge. The battle at the Drakali capital was like none before. Towers collapsed. Cannons screamed. Skyships roared overhead in duels of flame. The Drakali elite fought harder than ever, defending not just a stronghold, but their rule, their legacy, their throne. Kale moved through the chaos like a living fire. The spear flashed, cutting through armor and shadow alike. Wherever he fell, the flame host surged forward. Wherever he stood, walls broke. He reached the heart of the fortress, a towering chamber made of black crystal, where the Drakali High Warlord waited. Tall, armored in bone and steel, eyes burning red. "You carry a slave's name," the warlord growled. "You think fire makes you more?" Kale stepped forward. "I was a slave, but the fire didn't make me more." He raised the spear. "It reminded me I already was." The warlord struck first, fast, brutal. His blade was ancient, carved from the bones of fallen kings. Kale parried, slid, countered. Sparks flew. The spear and the blade screamed every time they clashed, but Kale didn't falter. He fought not with technique, but memory. Every whip, every scar, every night he spent thinking he'd never matter. And when the moment came, the spear flared brighter than ever before. Blinding light filled the chamber. Kale struck. The warlord fell. The fortress trembled. And across the capital, the Drakali banners burned. The war was over. Days passed. The stars grew quiet. Kyle stood before the ashes of the final council chamber. Not as a conqueror. Not as a ruler. But as a boy who remembered what it felt like to be invisible. Warriors offered him a crown. He refused. Leaders offered him a throne. He refused that too. "I don't want to be king," he said. "I want to make sure no one ever kneels the way I did." He gave the lands back to the people. The Flame Host disbanded, not as soldiers, but as founders of a new order, an alliance of the freed. They built schools where weapons once hung. They built councils where chains once ruled. Alara stayed by his side. She never spoke much about her past, but when asked why she stayed, she simply said, "Because I saw the fire in him before he did." And the spear, it no longer glowed in battle. It rested in a quiet place beneath the stars, waiting. One night, Kale returned to the old armory, now rebuilt as a memorial. The cracked stone cradle still stood there empty. He placed the spear back into it, and it burned gently, not with hunger, but with peace. He looked down at his hands. Once trembling, once afraid, now steady, now free. He stepped out into the starlight, no longer needing the spear to lead, because now the fire lived in the world he helped build, and for the first time in his life, he walked away from the battlefield, not as a slave, not as a warrior, but as the boy who was chosen, and became more than anyone believed he could be.